Content warning. This video speaks of topics related to mental health. Hello everybody, my name is Aiden Ng, and for as long as I've been alive, I've had bipolar disorder and a panic disorder. And in observance of Mental Health Awareness Month, I thought I'd answer some common questions and misconceptions people had about mental health. Let's get started. First up, what does a panic attack feel like? That's a really hard question to answer because if you've never had a panic attack, describing the experience can seem a little impossible since the closest comparable physical experiences are a stroke or a heart attack. The differences, of course, being that strokes and heart attacks are incredibly serious medical emergencies, while a panic attack just really suck. And that description makes it harder to explain because the severity of them don't really match up. So to give more context in an example, a friend of mine who is a few years older than me have been neurotypical their whole life. However, life stresses have unfortunately granted them their first panic attack recently. At about the same time, I had my first gout attack, which was something they had experience with, so we were exchanging notes. For those who don't know, gout is a form of arthritis, where uric acid forms around a bone's joints and turns into crystals. Basically, it's an extremely painful experience where tiny crystals are rubbing against your nerves and bones, causing them to swell and hurt. If that sounds bad to you, my friend says they'd rather have that than experience another panic attack in their life. They'd rather have tiny crystals slice up the insides of their bodies than have a panic attack. So, potato. Now, the next misconception is a common thing that I see online, or at least a common one in the online spaces I inhabit on this vile, disgusting internet. Oh, the horrors I've seen. It's usually older people saying, "Back in my days, we didn't have all these disorders." It's also often accompanied by things like, "I had a terrible life and I turned out fine," or "My dad beat me and I turned out fine." For those parts, the answer is if you turn out fine, you wouldn't be saying shit like that. It is in fact not fine behavior. And for the original misconception, it's a little more complicated than at first glance. We're going to use suicide rates because this is one of the more accurate data tracking for mental illnesses, because depending on stigma, coming out as mentally ill in certain places isn't an option, but dying is definitively tracked. Sort of. If you look at the suicide rate per population since the 1950s, it may seem straightforward that nothing have really changed and the rates have maintained, but that's only when you skip the social aspect of things. In the 1950s, you were 6 times more likely to die before the age of 15 than in 2020, which makes it a very odd phenomenon for suicide rate to not be higher back then. But that's because back then, suicides were often treated as accidents, so much so that the field of psychological autopsy was invented to determine the outcome of cases like those. And with this new field of forensics and the continued destigmatization of mental illnesses over the decades, we have managed to maintain the reported suicide rate, meaning that with an estimate of unreported suicide, the chart should probably look like this. You can see this phenomenon take place in suicide being reported more often for older people in the past compared to younger people of the same time period. And now the opposite is true because society has changed. Our understanding of it has changed. Suicide used to be something that we think old people do. And as the differences between suicide and accidents starts being identified, that number is now reversing. So no, there weren't less mental illnesses in the past. The people with them just died. This lack of understanding actually comes from another misconception, and that is that people don't understand the difference between general emotions, personality, and mental illnesses. The boundaries between those things can be hard to draw a line on, or at least that's what many neurotypicals seem to think. This often manifests itself in comments like, "I'm just a little OCD," or "I'm so bipolar," and even, "Everyone is sad sometimes." It's one of the more harmful cultural perceptions of mental illnesses because it's not done with malice, but with ignorance, and it actively trivializes the actual illnesses people go through. I have an obsessive compulsive personality, which means I sometimes feel the need to do irrational compulsive actions, like touching these weird boards next to escalators whenever I pass them. But even if I don't do it, I'll be fine. I'll feel a little uncomfortable and maybe a little weird, but eventually my mind will just wander on. However, a person with OCD, an obsessive compulsive disorder, who has the same irrational action will not feel fine. They will go out of their way to satisfy the impulse, even if it means having to double back to the escalator again just to touch the board. It can be a crippling and time exhaustive disorder, especially if you build out more of these rituals and compulsion. It's an obsessive thought followed by repetitive compulsion, hence the name. You can have different stages of it, and you can manage the impulse with therapy and medication, but you will feel the need to do your ritual for likely as long as you live. I like to describe this as your brain having switches. When you're sad, your sad switch turns on. When you're depressed, the depressed switch turns on. But over time, the switch should eventually turn off by itself. However, if you have a mental illness that causes major depressive disorder, that switch can get stuck. And the same thing with any other mental disorder. A switch in your brain is stuck. Imagine playing The Floor is Lava. Your brain turns on all the switches needed to play The Floor is Lava. Once you're done playing, those switches turns off. But if someone hits the switch really hard, cause some sort of trauma, or just have some natural faulty wiring, you'll be stuck playing Floor is Lava. You'll play Floor is Lava on the way to school. You'll play Floor is Lava when you're all grown up and at work. Sleeping, the floor is lava. Eating, the floor is lava. Walking down the aisle of your wedding, the floor is lava. That's the difference between a personality or emotion and an illness. Playing Floor is Lava for a few hours and playing Floor is Lava for the rest of your life. And speaking of life, why do some people commit suicide suddenly? This isn't a question I got from online, but it is one I have been asked personally a few times from suicide survivors. There are two types of suicide survivors, just to clarify. The more common ones are the people who are left behind after another's death, and the other are people who attempted but survived, also known as survivors of suicide. I have the unfortunate improbability of falling into both categories, and because of that, whenever the topic comes up, this is one of the more common questions I'm asked. The question is usually accompanied by an incredulous surprise, like, they were so happy the last time I saw them. I can't believe it. They sounded hopeful when we talked, or we even made plans next month. These are all common reactions to a sudden death. After all, it is surprising to see someone who seems to be doing well just stop. So I'll tell you what I know from my personal experience. It's not a well-studied phenomenon that I can gather, but I call it the last good day. When someone plans their death, there's a possibility that for a moment, they become happy. It's the same kind of happiness that happens when you are about to be done doing something you hate. The last leg of a marathon, or the final day in a hospital, or just like Fridays. You can take on any job and still smile if you know Friday is about to be over. More paperwork next week? Sure, that's next week Aiden's problem. Today I'm Friday Aiden. Just put it on my desk. But for someone attempting, that finish line isn't just the end of the work week, it's the end of life. So they, or like rather we, plan for things and make promises we don't know if we can keep. Want to meet up again? Sure, that's a problem for Alive Aiden. I should sign up for a university. After all, that's Alive Aiden's problem. And at that point, all the weight of responsibilities, the stress of life just sort of floats away. Because those are all problems for Alive Aiden. And we won't be alive in a few days. So who cares? But of course, all that happiness is kind of a trap. You can only feel that happiness if you know you aren't going to be there to see the consequences. So if, for any reason, you are still alive, it can feel like your boss calling you back to work for the weekend, and your mood can shift really quickly. And it's throughout this period that depression is easiest to spot because you see, joy, real happiness takes time, sometimes 10 years. There's a sudden change in personality. It means there's a sudden change in life. And likewise, if we somehow fail our attempt by luck or circumstances, the sudden drop into further depression will be another signal. If you know someone undergoing these rapid shifts in moods, approach them and leave yourself open to help, but don't force yourself into their life. It can get overwhelming. We must also remember that not all experiences of depression and suicidal tendencies are the same. Some people might never show any visual cues at all. So don't be overly hard on yourself if you couldn't save another person. Sometimes there really is just no way to tell. But that is why I always advocate the best way to help others is to just empathize and not be a complete assholes. So be there, but don't be a square.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Sorry for the video being late. I got really sick, lost my voice even. My next video is gonna take a while. It'll be however long it takes for my voice to get its back. But yeah, like, share, comment, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye.